Our scripture for today comes from Luke chapter 20, verses 27 through 40 from The Voice. Another group came to test him, this time from the Sadducees, a rival party of the Pharisees who believe that there is no resurrections. The Sadducees asked Jesus, "Teacher, Moses wrote in the Hebrew scriptures that a man must marry his brother's wife, and the new couple should bear children for his brother if his brother dies without heirs. Well, once there were 7 brothers, and the first took a wife and then died without fathering children. The second took her as a wife, and then he died childless. And then the third, and so on through the 7. They all died, leaving no children. Finally, the woman died too. Here's our question. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be? Since all 7 had her for a while, will she be the wife of 7 men at once?" Jesus responded, "The children of this era marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to attain the resurrection of the dead in the coming era do not marry and are not given in marriage. They are beyond mortality. They are on the level of heavenly messengers. They are children of God and children of the resurrection." Since you brought up the issue of resurrection, even Moses made it clear in the passage about the burning bush that the dead are in fact raised. After all, he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. By Moses' time, they were all dead. But God isn't God of the dead, but of the living. So all live to God. The religious scholar said, "Teacher, that was a good answer." After this, no one had the courage to ask him any more questions. May the font of wisdom bless the words we have read and plant them deeply in our minds, our hearts, and our lives.
Thank you, Marlon. You ever wondered what happens after we die? I mean, raise your hand if you've ever asked, is there an afterlife? And what's it like? Raise your hand if you've ever asked a question like, is the resurrection real? Raise your hand if you don't like to raise your hand. The record note, there were more answers and more responses to that than the... I suspect we all ask some version of that question at some point. Right? Perhaps as soon as we discover, we realize, we understand that we are mortal. Perhaps as sentient beings, we can't help but wonder and question and speculate about death and whatever might happen afterwards. And in this place, we try to be honest about that, right? Maybe especially on Ash Wednesday, but all the time. Like on Ash Wednesday when we, in that Latin phrase, memento mori, right? We remember that we will die. And we face that, at least attempt to face that, without fear. And yet fear in the face of death is natural and normal and human. And perhaps that's why the Sadducees, or Sadducees, look, when it comes to pronouncing names from like 2,000 years ago in a whole other language, I would say, 1, say it with confidence and nobody will know the difference. And 2, it's 2,000 years ago. None of us really know exactly how it was pronounced, and certainly not in English. So, you're off the hook, Marlon, for saying it wrong. The Sadducees are asking a question that we all ask at some point. And for once, Jesus gives us a straight answer. Well, sort of. Essentially, it seems to me, Jesus says, when you wonder about death and whatever might happen next, just know this. God's got it. God's got you. God's got your loved ones. They continue to live in God. God's got this. God is love and God is life, and all who have died in some way continue to live in God. God's got you. It may not be entirely satisfying for those of us who have curiosity, or if we want to know just exactly what it's like. What's it look like? Are there streets? Are there cars? Is there marriage? Whatever. Like, what's it like? Are we all gardeners? Are we all ranchers? Are we all, I don't know, urban city dwellers, like Revelation seems to say? Like, what is the deal? How's it work? And instead of answering any of those reasonable, normal human questions, Jesus says, essentially, breathe. God's got it. God's got you. God's got your loved ones. God is life and love, and God's got it. Maybe not satisfying, but I find that reassuring. I feel like we can rest in that. If we trust Jesus, and we've said we're all here because at some point in our lives, and some of us even just maybe a month ago, renewed our vows to trust in Jesus. Let's trust him in this. God's got it. Whatever's next, God's got it. And anybody that tries to give us a too detailed a description of whatever that's like, I promise you, they're trying to sell something. Right? It's a book or a movie or a magazine article or something. Anybody that says, no, this is exactly how it is, they don't know. None of us know. We can't know. So maybe the Sadducees are just like us, that they're wondering what's going on. Except, not really. Because what do we know about the Sadducees? What do we know, according to the text that we just read, what do we know about them? They're scholars and they don't believe in the resurrection. That's exactly right. So, in other words, they're asking this question in bad faith. They're trying to trick Jesus based on something they don't really actually believe or think is possible. They're just trying to use it as a gotcha moment. Thank God we've evolved all past, any use of bad faith arguments with anybody. Now, like all the most diabolical of bad faith arguments, this one has a kernel of truth. This premise that they set up in the Old Testament is called Levirate marriage, and it's this idea, just as they said, that if a woman dies childless, well, then her husband's brother is supposed to marry her and try to provide a child. Now, why is that? Well, because at the time, the woman dies becomes a widow. Sorry, not if the woman dies. If the woman becomes a widow and has no children, she has no place. She's vulnerable. And it's an attempt to keep her safe. And let's be honest, in patriarchal society, it's also an attempt to maintain the husband's name and line. So that was the rule. If you're a widow and you don't have kids, your husband's brother is supposed to marry you and try to make that happen. So the question for all you ladies here today is, who's your favorite brother-in-law? One of those situations that makes me happy to be an only child. This also seems to me a great reminder that the biblical text did not just fall out of the sky, complete in the form we have it now, certainly not in English, but rather, and I think this makes it even more miraculous, was developed over years and even centuries by scores of folks writing for a particular people at a particular place at a particular time and responding to issues that were relevant and necessary then, rather than a rule book for all people in all places at all times. In a society where the women were property, as ugly as that is, it's true, when women were property, well, we all know you got to protect your property. That's a sort of uncharitable reading of it. I think a more charitable reading would say we want to protect the most vulnerable. And what trio of folks does the Bible over and over again use to represent all who are vulnerable? Widows, orphans, strangers. We might say widows, orphans, foreigners. We might say widows, orphans, immigrants. Homeless, yes. Homeless, right, homeless. Folks who are most vulnerable. That part hasn't changed very much, has it? So this rule is about trying to protect the most vulnerable among them. That's the kernel of truth. Here's how we know they weren't asking in good faith. What do we know about them? Well, the Sadducees, we know that they were a rival party active in Palestine in Jesus' time. But by the time Luke is writing, the author of the Gospel according to Luke, we'll call him Luke just for sake of ease, right? By the time Luke is writing, apparently his audience doesn't know who they are. Why else does he include the little note reminding them what their deal was? So here's one of the little small ways that the text clues us into when this was written. What happened in Jerusalem in the late 60s? Not like 1960s, like the original 60s. Destroyed, yeah, exactly. There was a revolt. Finally, the Jewish folks had had enough of Roman occupation, and they violently rebelled. Somewhat to their credit, they lasted a couple of years against the Empire of Rome until the empire decided it's time to put their foot down. And in 70, they destroyed the city, absolutely destroyed the temple. Well, the Sadducees were their authority was based in the temple. So we know that, in that sense, we know that Luke, it's a clue that the Gospel according to Luke was written long enough after year 70 that people had forgotten, couldn't be assumed to know who the Sadducees were or what their deal was. One of the small little ways that the text clues us into knowing something about it. Sadducees making a bad faith argument. They don't really believe in resurrection, but they know that their rivals, the Pharisees, do. So let's do like people have been doing probably forever, certainly still today. Let's take the most ridiculous, outrageous example of what you think and use that to expose how silly your idea must be. And, if we can score some points against our rivals, the Pharisees, at the same time, so much the better for us. We know they're arguing in bad faith. So how does Jesus respond? I think this is the interesting thing. An interesting thing about this. Jesus responds, first of all, by ignoring their question, ignoring the face value of their question. He recognizes that it's not in good faith, and so he doesn't engage in the ridiculous part. I think that's something we can learn and learn from. He tries to make a mockery of what their rivals believe, and he doesn't engage in that part. He doesn't say, well, here's how it's going. No, he says, you're asking the wrong question. But then he does something so Jesus-y. He also responds to them in a way that they could understand. One of the things we know about the Sadducees is that for them, the entirety of scriptures were the first 5 books. The Pentateuch, the laws of Moses, right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And that was it. That's all that they recognized. And they would say, well, we don't believe in the resurrection because it's not there. Those 5 books don't say anything about resurrection. You see what genius move Jesus does here? Like, if it were me, I'd just tell him to, bleep off. But Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus uses language they understand to try to expand what they think. He says, no, look, right here in the law of Moses, right here in the Pentateuch, right here in the first 5 books, we say God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He uses what he knows is important to them to respond to their question. He responds in language they can understand. Now, whether they have the ability to understand it or not, I don't know. Whether they have the openness to understand it or not, it kind of seems like probably not. There's a famous saying, and I Keep forgetting to look up who actually said it first. But it's difficult to make a person understand a thing that their livelihood depends on them not understanding. It's difficult for a person to understand something that their livelihood depends on them not understanding. Seems likely that was the Sadducees in this moment. But here Jesus is, having the compassion enough to respond to them in language that they, if they're willing to, could hear. My friends, let's not learn the wrong lesson here. The Sadducees have questions about the afterlife, and I don't think Jesus is rejecting those questions at all. I think he's saying, you don't have to worry about it. I think he's saying, if the God we meet in Jesus, if what we say is true, like here's the formula, here's that transitive property all the time, we keep coming back to it. If what we say is true, if that Jesus is the visible expression of the invisible God, if that's true, and we believe that it is, then God has to be at least as kind as Jesus. God has to be at least as compassionate as Jesus. God has to be at least as forgiving and loving as Jesus. Right? If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Yes. It's the one and only math formula I remember. So that's why I use it all the time. If who we meet in Jesus is a representative of who God is and what's important to God, my friends, let's trust that God's got this when it comes to whatever is next after this life. God is life and God is love. God's got this. God's got you. God's got your loved ones. God's got it. But we want to say, what about justice? If that's true, then the worst people that we know, don't they get a little punishment? I mean, really, that's why we want to have an afterlife, right? Like it's divided into good place and bad place. Because we know those people need some punishment. Let's be honest, come on. Maybe that's the hardest part about this idea. Can we trust the justice of God? Can we really trust what Jesus says, that God's got this? And whatever that's like, we can't control anyway, so let's not worry about that. For several centuries, Christians in America have been obsessed with trying to focus on the afterlife. Why? Honestly, the short answer is white supremacy. One of these days, we'll do the deeper dive into how and why that is. But because if you have a situation full of injustice in the earth and you don't want to have to address that, a great way around addressing it is saying, no, the most important thing is afterlife. What does Jesus say about the afterlife? Stop worrying about it. Who by worrying can add even a moment to their life? No, God's got this. God's got you. God's got your loved ones. God's got it. In the meantime, let's focus on the purpose of that weird brother-in-law law. Not the creepy part, but the purpose, which says take care of those who are vulnerable. It says, don't worry about the afterlife. I've got that. I am love. I am life. I've got that. What you need to do, what I want you to worship by caring for those who are hungry in your midst. And boy, howdy are we doing that. We're going to celebrate that in a few minutes. Care for those who are lonely in your midst. We're working on that. Care for those who are mourning in your midst. We do that. My friends, became aware of a great poem called The Question by Maureen Tirabassi. And she writes this: all wealthy men, the Sadducees, who are defined by not believing any afterlife, tell their story of a woman whose welfare status required her to marry 7 brothers. They tell it like the poverty of women is half stand-up comedy joke, half trap for the out-of-town prophet. And under that facade, Jesus answers the question we all have: how will I be resurrected? Will I be the child playing or the child fearful? The relentless teen, the lover, a worried parent, the working too hard professional? Will I be the person from the years I was so disappointed by life? Or never sober? Or living in the wrong marriage? Or living with dementia or cancer? Many, probably more than 7, are the people most of us have been. So which will it be? When we meet the Holy One in the place without time, and Jesus just says to you and to me and to us, you're asking the wrong question. Because God's got this. God's got you. God's got your loved ones. God's got this. Meanwhile, our hungry neighbors need us now. 30% of children in District 201 receive free and reduced lunch. Some of them have accrued debt for lunch. We require children, as we should, to go to school, but then we won't feed them. And so some of them accrue debt in order to eat. We're going to worry about whatever happens uncontrollable that we can't control afterlife when children in our neighborhood don't have a way to pay for lunch? No, my friends. God's got that other part. Here and now, our hungry neighbors need us. Here and now, our isolated neighbors need us. Here and now, our abused neighbors need us. Here and now, our hurting neighbors need us. God's got the afterlife well in hand. Let's trust Jesus on that. And like Red said, let's get busy living. Let's get busy partnering with the Holy Spirit to bring about more goodness, more justice, more kindness, more compassion, more empathy, and justice for all those who need it now, here. Because God's got the rest. Here. That's up to you and me and us. Amen? May it be so.